Hi, welcome to Snippets on Stamps. So today we are looking very briefly at the history of the postal system in our country. So did you know that it was actually Henry VIII who first came up with a postal system? It was the royal postal system because what he wanted back in 1516, so 1516, several hundreds of years ago, Henry VIII, who's most famous for his wives, decided to set up a royal postal system so all the royal households around the country could communicate with each other, share messages and be kept up to date about what was going on. So he started it in 1516, but it took King Charles I in 1635, so not just a few decades, we are talking over 100 years, it took him till 1635 to actually make it out open to the public. And then it took another while, 1660, for King Charles II to actually launch the General Post Office, which we still use those words today actually, GPO covers for a first day cover. Yeah. So in 1660, the GPO, so what we are kind of recognising as a postal system now, that was really properly launched in 1660, and it is the oldest, one of the oldest organisations in the world, which is pretty amazing. So bearing in mind postage stamps didn't really come about until like the 1840s. People used to have to pay to receive a letter, so which is quite a big thing really, because it went on the distance and how many pages it was, so how thick the letter was. So that was how they paid. So they didn't pay for a stamp. You could buy prepaid, but generally it was paid for by the recipient. So the recipient, whoever got the letter, had to pay for it, which is not great because some people refuse it because they didn't have the money, and you don't want to pay for a letter when you find out it's either something, well, I don't think they had junk mail in those days, so it would have been a worthwhile letter probably. But anyway, you get my drift. But because the postal system was actually fully established by 1660, they needed something to mark how people received the letters and whether or not it had been paid for. So they had, the first postmaster was called Henry VIII, and he did things like the postmark. That's how the postmark came about. So he ended up, I think he called them they ended up being called bishop's marks. So he would do a postmark on it to show that it had been paid for or it had gone through the system, and that's how postmarks came about. And in fact, back in the day when stamp collecting first came about as a hobby, people weren't necessarily collecting stamps, but they were collecting postmarks. Whereas it's sort of changed a bit now. So that's really interesting. But the penny black, which was our first sticky stamp, our first stamp that was produced back in 1840. So, and that was when we had the uniform postal rates introduced. So it all started in 1660, but it took till 1840 to have a recognised flat rate. This is how much it's going to cost you to send it here, there and everywhere. And that happened in 1840. So that's quite interesting. And yeah, and though people complain about the cost of stamps, I do think we are one of the cheapest, I think, in the country. No, not the country, in the world. I think we are one of the cheapest in the world. But also, sometimes you just have to think, when you look at the cost, you think, crikey, that's really expensive. I find what makes me feel better is, yeah, but how much of my time, how much would it cost me, time, fuel, public transport, whatever, how much would it cost me to hand deliver it? And in the grand scheme of things, it's not really very much at all. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed your snippets on stamps.